Hello. Today we're going to talk about the developmental influences on child health promotion. This is chapter 28 in your book. So we have some basic definitions of the foundations of growth and development that we're going to start with. So growth is an increase in the number and size of new cells as they divide and synthesize new proteins, result in an increased size and weight of a whole or any of its parts. And when we look at development, we're looking at a gradual change and expansion, advancement from lower to more advanced stage of complexity, increased capacity through growth, maturation, and learning. The other two we want to look at are maturation and differentiation. So maturation is an increase in the competence and adaptability, which is usually described as a qualitative change to the function at a higher level. And differentiation is the process by which early cells and structures are systematically modified and altered. So the differentiation is going to happen early on in the fetus before the baby's even born. When we look at the stages of development, we're looking at specific developmental tasks which must be successfully completed to effectively function in the environment. And there's lots of various theories for development, which we'll discuss throughout this lecture. When looking at the directional trends, here's a good visual of the directional trends here. We typically go cephalocaudal, which is head to toe. So when the baby's born, their head is the most developed and their hands and feet are the least developed. And we're going to move in that direction. We also move from proximal distal. So from near to far. So again, the lungs and the chest the heart are going to develop, and then we're going to move out to help develop those limbs. By 5 years old, children are going to show preference for which hand they want to use. And the proximal distal is also referring to the development of the gross motor skills before the development of those fine motor skills. When we look at sequential trends, it's referring to the fact that things happen in sequence. So one step has to happen before the next step. It doesn't necessarily have to happen within a specific time frame, but step one occurs, then step two occurs. An example of this is that kids will crawl, and then they'll creep, and then they'll stand, and then they'll walk. And every once in a while, a child skips a step here or there, but for the most part, it follows that sequence. As for developmental pace, there is a precise order to it, like we just discussed, but it can be different timing for each individual child. We just want kids to reach certain milestones by certain times, and when those milestones are reached, that's when we become concerned for potential developmental delays. There's sensitive periods of time for these milestones to be reached, and sensitive periods of time for development, which could be considered critical, sensitive, vulnerable, and optimal. And we can have either positive or negative influences that can drastically impact the development of a child if it happens during one of those sensitive periods. And then again, we just want to keep in mind that everybody is going to particularly grow at a different rate. We're not going to see everybody hitting every single milestone at 11 months, everybody walks. It's not the way it works, but they should be in a particular sequence along the way. Girls do develop faster than boys, especially up through puberty, and girls will go through puberty before boys. So we can expect that. It's also something that we'll want to educate our parents on who are having their first boy if they have girls at home, because they'll expect the little boy to reach these milestones around the same time as the girls, and it might cause them worry or concern if they don't. Back to that little baby. As for the biological and physical development, we're going to take a look at the external proportions. And so that's what we're looking at that's what we're talking about the body when we're looking at that. By 2 months old, the baby's head is 50% of its body weight, which again speaks to that cephalocaudal development where the head is going to develop faster. The bone growth in the baby and in the child is the best determinant of how old that child is, just because it has such a structured growth to it. There's certain syndromes like Down syndrome, babies are going to grow a little bit slower. When we're looking at the skeletal growth, the bone age, again, is the most accurate accurate measurement of development itself. The nurse needs to be aware that in children who break a bone, we need to be very, very cognizant about where that break has occurred. If it breaks along the growth plate, there can be significant impact for the growth. The other thing is that when there's a break there, it's not caught a lot of the time because it's not easy to see on an x-ray. So we really need to listen and hear our parents and our patients so that we can determine whether or not we think there is a potential for a break based off of the signs and symptoms that they're presenting with. We want to provide adequate education around protective equipment for all stages of life. So my sister and brother-in-law were watching my daughter yesterday and sent me a funny picture with her. She's 7 and my niece is 8, and they're both standing on skateboards, and my niece is completely decked out. Helmet, elbow pads, knee pads, wrist guards, and there's my daughter just standing there like, what? And she had nothing on. My sister said she called her husband immediately and laid into him about putting some extra gear on her, which they had, but it was a great example of sometimes we just forget. Sometimes we don't have it available, but it's so important. I would never let my kids go on anything that has wheels unless they're on the grass in the backyard without a helmet, because I've seen too many head injuries to even go there. It's just too scary. We're going to take a look at this curve here because this really shows it's a great visual about how the different systems grow and at the rate that they grow. And look at the lymphoid system. It peaks at about age 10 to 12, and it's almost 200% of the adult lymph system. It does, again, fall off, as you can see from that curve, but it's interesting to me that it peaks at that time, and at that time of adolescence where kids are really starting to venture out from their homes and go out into the world a little bit more. The other systems have somewhat of a general curve to them. You can see the genital curve is somewhat flat until puberty and then just skyrockets, which probably explains a lot of the emotional distress that we experience from those lovely adolescents. And here's just another good visual of the growth. So these are siblings, and you can see how much larger the one sibling is just because he's older. So we grow pretty fast. Start off as tiny little babies, all of us. When we're looking at metabolism, the basal metabolic rate is incredibly high in newborns. They are burning their glucose and their fat very quickly. Its basal metabolic rate is also always higher in boys. So ladies, that's why if your significant other or spouse can lose weight so much faster than you, because their basal metabolic rate is significantly increased, and that continues throughout life. So when you hit those upper 30s, upper 40s, that's when you really start to see that, where the men are able to diet for 3 days and lose 5 pounds, and women have to diet for 3 years and lose 2. So just keep that in mind, that basal metabolic rate in males is always higher, and the basal metabolic rate in infants is definitely increased significantly past where it's going to drop off to. When we look at temperature, we want to make sure that our kiddos are always prepared for various temperatures, especially the little babies. They're so susceptible to temperature extremes in one way or the other, and their bodies aren't great at thermoregulation initially. So we want to make sure that we're clothing them appropriately. It's for newborns, it's better to go on the side of more clothes than less clothes, because they have a tougher time keeping that heat in, because they don't have the fat that more mature children have. They also have more body surface area. So we want to make sure that we're providing them adequate coverage. And then sleep and rest. We all know how important sleep and rest is. Good luck with that in nursing school, right? But we want to promote sleep as much as possible, and talk to our parents about the importance of making sure their kids are able to get enough sleep. Infants are going to sleep significantly more than children, and sleep cycles vary from stage to stage. So as an infant, the actual sleep cycle is about 50 to 60 minutes long. And then once you're in adolescence, it's the adult length of 90 minutes. I'm sorry if I said seconds earlier, I meant minutes. So 50 to 60 minutes for those little babies, and then 90 minutes for the adults. And what that means is that the body goes through a full cycle every 90 minutes and will reset. We want to get through a certain number of cycles every night to fully take advantage of all of those protective functions that sleep provides for us. So when we get older, and even in adolescence, the need for sleep doesn't go down, but the demands of our social calendar and our responsibilities obviously does. So if we can start early talking about sleep to parents, then they can be cognizant of it when those children get a little bit older. Nutrition. So we have a wonderful perspective on nutrition in the United States these days. Our food is primarily full of preservatives and sugar. And we can see that in the increase of gestational diabetes, of type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, of just different all sorts of different disease processes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, that can be related back to nutrition. So we have a great opportunity at both the prenatal appointments and at those pediatrician appointments to start those discussions about food. Prenatally, we want women to be eating healthy diets. I've said this numerous times, but remember, the pregnant woman does not get a whole lot of extra calories. The breastfeeding mom gets a little bit more. And we want those calories that she's intaking to be a huge variety of food. We want her to have, that 4 square food, although what's in those 4 squares has changed a little bit over the years, but still we want a well-balanced nutrition. We want to make sure that we're educating parents in those pediatrician appointments, because we have that captive audience there. And when they have newborns, they're there every few months. So we can really be discussing that even before they're thinking about it, to just kind of get it going in their head. Hey, you know what? That full-fledged apple juice every day is not a good idea. Or, talk about watering down the apple juice, talk about offering vegetables and fruits. And it is interesting that babies whose moms have good nutrition during the prenatal period have better nutrition choices when they become older. So there is a correlation there. We also want to keep in mind that appetites are going to fluctuate. So we're going to have babies who have growth spurts, and this is good to discuss for that infant who's not eating solid food yet, and for those babies who are eating solid food, because their growth, the growth spurts are going to cause them to eat more food. And kids are kind of funny. They don't need to eat particularly in a meal what we would want them to. We want to look more at their whole day worth of food as opposed to just one meal, because they might graze throughout the day. They might not want to sit down and eat. That's the most challenging aspect. So educating parents that they can look at the whole day's worth of food as opposed to one particular meal, and then just starting that education early about how important it is to provide their children with adequate nutrition. Temperament. One of my favorite subjects is I have a very difficult child, which makes things challenging at times. But your temperament, we all have one, is the manner of thinking, behaving, or reacting, and it's a characteristic of the individual. So we have various temperaments. We have the easy child. This child's kind of easygoing. They only cry if they need something. They are easily adaptable to change. They're not too concerned with who's holding them or what position they're in. They're just easygoing. Those are brilliant children. And then we have the difficult child. And the difficult child is going to cry a lot. They're very irritable. They're very opinionated about everything. So they don't like change. It takes them a long time to adapt to change. They have a lot of irregularity in their own schedule, whereas the easy child has a very regular schedule that they're able to anticipate and maintain, and the difficult child is not able to maintain that schedule. Parents can become very distraught with a difficult child. And our role from a nursing perspective there is to educate the parents that they are not doing anything wrong, that their child has a difficult temperament and it's going to take a little bit more time to process different things, but that the parents themselves are not doing anything wrong. The slow to warm up child is a child who just is kind of in the middle. It just takes them a little bit more time to get used to a new environment. It takes them a little bit more time to transition from eating to sleeping. It's just, they're somewhere in the middle. Excuse me, sorry. So when we have these three temperaments, we want to make sure, again, that the parents understand that this is not their fault. It's not something they're doing parenting wise, but that this is just the underlying characteristics that this individual is relaying. There's research that supports that temperaments can be changed based off of parental interaction, and there's research that supports that it doesn't change. So pick one. The easy children are about 40% of the population, and the difficult child's about 10, and everybody else is slow to warm up. So again, we just want to really educate our parents that the temperament is there and it's not their fault. Now, saying that, we also want to be cognizant that there might be some parental deficits that we need to address. But if we have a parent who is seemingly very loving of their child and they're coming in, they're like, I don't know what to do, this baby just won't stop crying, those are the parents that we want to help, especially with those difficult children. We want to educate our parents about shaken baby syndrome, because remember, babies cry to communicate, and we talked about that last week. They don't have any other means of communication early on, so they're going to cry. Some babies cry a lot, and it can be very distressing to a parent to listen to a baby cry for a long period of time. And one of the things that has happened is parents will shake babies and to get them to stop crying, and they'll shake them so violently that the brainstem is severed, and we have a significant deficit, obviously, in that child. So we want to make sure our parents understand that the baby is not trying to intentionally irritate them by crying. It's just that that's our only means of communication. So that we'll talk about colicky babies a little bit later, but it's a good point to bring up then as well. So as for the various theoretical foundations, we're going to explore Freud first here. So we have the psychosexual development, the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic stage, the latency period, and the genital phase. There's a table in your book on page 729. It's table 28.2, and it actually compares all the theories. So Freud and Erikson and Piaget, it has it all laid out there really nicely. So if you should take a look at that to get a good understanding of how they line up. So with Freud, we're looking at the physical development in conjunction with the mental development, and the growth stages. Each growth stage along the way is going to depend on the completion of a specific task. So the oral stage you have to complete before you move on to the anal stage. Freud was also a lot of his theories have the id, the ego, and the superego attached to them. Remember, the id is the unconscious, and it's going to respond to pleasure and instinct. The ego is your conscience. It's not your conscience. It's conscious thought, and it has to do with reality, and it helps to block the id when the id is being irrational. So when the id is just pleasure seeking, the ego can step in and say, no, we actually have to take out the trash every once in a while. Otherwise we'll live in a house full of trash. And then we have the superego, and the superego is the actual conscience. And that is going to be the moral regulator, that tells us right and wrong. So not just practicality, but also right and wrong. And these are all built in and develop at various stages along Freud's developmental curve. And then we have Erikson, and Erikson uses a lot of the trust versus mistrust. So this is going to develop, trust is going to develop if everything is met within that first year. The baby and the child's going to learn to trust. And then we're going to look at autonomy versus shame and doubt. If we achieve trust, we're going to have a child who is able to have faith and has optimism. Autonomy versus shame, we have bodily control, we have positive self-control. This is where willpower is going to come in. With the initiative versus guilt, this is where strong imagination develops. We have a conscience and a direction and a purpose. So there's a lot of development going on in those 3 to 6 years. And then we have industry versus inferiority, where we become workers and we're able to produce. If it's negative, it has a sense of inability to contribute. And then identity versus role confusion. This can result in role, if it is negative, it will result in role confusion. And if it's positive, then we're going to have an individual who has devotion and fidelity to others and values their own ideologies. So they don't develop ideologies based off of what society is telling them, for instance, that they stick with their own and they're able to have their own moral compass. Mm-hmm. So we have a lovely picture here of some kids playing with water, which kid doesn't love to play with water? So this is just exploration via play. And then our next theoretical foundation is Piaget. And so Piaget is going to look more at the cognitive development. So birth to 2 years, we start with sensory-motor, which we have cause and effect. And we have the progression of the development of object permanence. So it's not quite solidified, potentially by 2, but it's moving in that direction. And so babies in the sensory-motor stage are touching and feeling to interpret their environment. And when we get to the pre-operational stage, we still have the inability to put ourselves in the place of somebody else, but we are able to interpret things in relation to to ourselves. So we're going to interpret what we see and feel based off of what we think. And this age can be challenging for parents because these children can't put themselves in their parents' shoes. They can't understand what it is that their parents are feeling and thinking. And it might be seemingly disrespectful that the parent is, you know, running around the house trying to clean everything up and stressed out and trying to put dinner on the table, and the kid's over in the corner playing and yelling and screaming and having a grand old time. And so again, back to the educating our parents that during this time frame, the children are developing that ability to put themselves in somebody else's place, but they don't quite have it yet. They're still very egocentric. Hold on a second. Sorry, there's always something. Moving on to concrete operations. So this is when children develop logical, coherent, there's thought. They have things progress, right? They're still unable to abstract, but they can consider the points of views of others. So the 7 to 11-year-old is able to potentially understand that the parent is completely stressed out in the scenario we just discussed. So they might actually step up and realize, oh, I need to help, or I need to not be playing right here at their feet while they're trying to do everything else. And once you reach formal operations, we're adaptable and flexible. We're able to understand other people's points of view. We're able to make abstract connections and able to function adequately at that full cognitive state. So as language develops, more and more ability develops as well. So babies are born able to, with the mechanism to speak, but they don't have the physical control over the muscles in the mouth and of their tongue to form the words. They also don't have the cognitive ability yet to form the words. So our children are always able to understand more than they're able to communicate. So we want to keep in mind that kids can understand a lot more of what we are communicating to them, but they might not be able to communicate that back. And language develops through interaction with adults. So we want to make sure that we're talking to our parents about talking to their babies, reading to their babies. All of those things are going to help with that language development. The moral development, which is Kohlberg's theory, it comes with 3 levels. So we have the pre-conventional level, the conventional level, and the post-conventional level. And the pre-conventional level is where kids react to the adults. So for instance, if I'm screaming and yelling at my 2-year-old, then they're going to realize that behavior is a non-desired behavior, right? And they're going to think, oh, I guess I shouldn't do that. Most of the time, some kids don't pick up on those things. Or they just like to push their boundaries. The conventional level is when we see conformity to our groups. So our group could be a peer group, it could be our family, it could be our class at school. So we're going to see various conformities that occur. And then the post-conventional kind of aligns with Erickson's last stage as well, to where we're able to make those individual distinctions and individual decisions around our ethical and morals, our ethics and morals. So we're not going to allow if we become to this fully developed post-conventional stage, we're not going to allow the influence of others to affect our core belief system. When we look at body image and self-esteem, this is very important for the adolescent age. And body image for adolescents is what drives a lot of what they do. It is something that can be can have an impact on babies too, not necessarily from what they think, because they're not processing, well, I'm bigger or little or anything like that, but what their abilities are, and how they're growing. When it comes to children, just the smallest little imperfection can have a big impact on the way a child sees themselves, especially if it's something that's overtly visible to others, and if it's something that is brought up by their peers. So we all know that kids are not the kindest, and it's, again, they're just egocentric. So they don't understand that what they're saying is impacting somebody else emotionally. And so we might have a child who has a large birthmark on their face, and that might get, children might talk about that at school, and depending on who it is, what their relationship with the child is, and how it's discussed. So is it called ugly? Is it called curious? Is it called, what's that thing on your face? They're going to internalize that, and that's going to have an impact on their body image. This is how they think of their body, obviously. So when we look at self-esteem, you can see how these two are related, because body image is going to impact the self-esteem. Self-esteem, though, is made up of more than just body image. We're going to look at their competence and how the individual feels competent in the tasks that they need to achieve, what their sense of control of their environment is, the moral worth. So what they are able to contribute, and whether they're able to maintain their potential, or their personal morality. And then the worthiness of love and acceptance. And that comes from the family. So providing that loving, open environment at home is important for the development of an adequate self-esteem. Play. So anybody with children has probably heard all about the importance of play. And when it comes to preschool time, it's the discussion, do we do an academic preschool? Do we do a play preschool? And play is so important in the development of kids. And we have various classifications of play. And the purpose, and those different classifications have different purposes within the development. When we look at social affective play, this is the relationship between people. So if I'm holding a 2-month-old baby and I smile at the baby's going to smile back at me, and it's going to know that it's in a positive environment. So having those interactions, even with the newborn, is so important, so that they see the emotions on the parent's face and on the sibling's face, and they understand that everything in their positive emotions was what we want to convey to them. And then we have the sense and pleasure play, and this is for kind of the 1-year-olds to 2-year-olds, and what they're doing here is playing with their senses. And it's a little bit earlier than 1, but we want to be careful with those things that can go in the mouth, right? So this is playing with sand and water. It's swinging or rocking. Those are very comforting things. So anything that's going to entice those senses of that small child is going to fall into the sense pleasure play. And when we look at skill play, we're looking at the development and the demonstration of new skills, right? Remember, children are ego-driven, so they want to be recognized for what it is that they're doing. They want us to watch them. However, this can also produce some significant frustration for children when they're unable to actually achieve what it is they're trying to do. So for those of you with children, if you've ever had a child try to build a block tower, as tall as them, they might get really frustrated because it keeps falling down when it's 6 blocks high or whatever it might be. So that's something that be aware of. However, this also does teach them endurance, and it teaches them to keep trying. And so positive reinforcement and positive encouragement is important when we have these toddlers doing this skill play. Unoccupied behavior is kind of the daydreaming. So when children they're in their own heads, that's okay. Let them have that time. They're working things out. They're in La La Land, if you will. And we have dramatic or pretend play. And this is where kids get the chance to try on different roles. So it's almost like sim lab for you guys, where you are being the nurse. And this is where kids get to be the parent. They get to be the teacher or the doctor. And they like to play those various roles, and also tell other people what to do, because they're constantly being told what to do, right? And so it's an exploration of their environment in a sense. And then games. So preschoolers, we don't want to engage preschoolers in competitive games necessarily, because they're not very good at them. One, they don't like to lose. Who does? But they're really bad losers, preschoolers. And then they also want to change the rules of the game. They're not really willing to do what it is that the game wants. They just kind of want to do their own game, especially one that they can win. So the children past preschool really do enjoy engaging in games, and it's good for the development of that sense of, well, I need to put effort into this, and I might not achieve my set goal. So here's that sense play where she's playing with the paint, which I'm sure felt fabulous. It's super sticky and squishy. And then here we are looking at skill play. So we're taking the paper out and putting the paper in. And here we're looking at the various roles that play, or I'm sorry, reading the wrong thing. Where play comes in from a social perspective. So those of you who have been to the Child Development Center have noticed that kids play in different ways as they grow. So the onlooker play is early on, and these kids are going to sit back and they're going to watch. And this is younger kids who maybe 6-7 months. So they're going to watch other people play. And then we have solitary play, and these kids like to have other people close by, and these typically follow development. So usually the onlooker play is earlier, then we move on to solitary, parallel, associative, and cooperative. But throughout the stages, people can fall back into those things. I mean, we all know, do you sometimes like to just sit back and watch other people interact as opposed to actually doing the interaction? So these can occur at any stage of development. However, it's more common in along the continuum. So solitary play, they want to have others close by, but they don't want to play with them. And parallel play is where they're doing the same type of play right next to each other, but not together. So this is a good example of parallel play. We have 2 toddlers here who are playing in the sand, playing with buckets, but they're not playing together. They're not working together to achieve a goal. And the associative play, so this is associative play where we have kids who are interacting and playing together, but again, there's no common goal. They haven't assigned roles. There's no stated leader. It's just, okay, now we're going to do this. Now we're going to do this. Now we're going to do this. And we're going to do it as a group, but we don't have one person taking over the group saying, I'm the leader of the group and this is what we're going to do. And we have structure and we have a goal. That is cooperative play. And this is an example of cooperative play. So as you can see here, they are trying to achieve a goal. They're trying to put the appropriate shapes and colors in the right spot. And this is organized play. We're going to plan. We're going to have a purpose to our play, and we're playing to achieve a goal. So play has wonderful implications in the development of a child, and it gives the child the ability to carry out a bunch of different functions that they wouldn't otherwise be able to because of their lower physical and mental ability. So they're able to play things out without the responsibility, right? So it's how children learn and interpret their environment. It's an opportunity to explore just the various physical and natural realms that the child has available to them. This is a cute little picture. And just a reminder, we should all find different types of play that help us, because it's a great form of stress relief and tension relief. And so if we're able to engage in play, even as adults, it's really great for to release all of that stress. Good luck with that in nursing school, right? But still, it's just something to keep in mind that if you have a hobby, go do it, because you'll feel so much better and be so much more productive after. Here's just a picture of some friends, although they don't look too happy, but where they're hanging out. Looks like they're at a theme park going to play. Now, toys. So there's always the question, do we do toys? Do we not do toys? And toys are a great supplement to play, and they're very supportive, especially in that imaginative play, and also supportive of some of the dexterities that we want children to learn and develop. So building blocks is great. Dress-up clothes are great. We can tell parents they don't need to get elaborate toys that beep and move and things like that, but having toys that the children can manipulate themselves is important in development. We also we give parents the opportunity to play with their children if there's toys available. So we can sit down and we can all do a puzzle together. We can sit down and build a castle together with the blocks. We want to caution parents against the use of walkers and too much use of swings. Swings are great for newborns to calm them, but as kids get older, the infant swings or I forget what they're called, but they bounce in the doorway. So kids like to move and bounce and things of that nature, but those items like walkers and bouncers that restrict the child's actual movement it's just that, it's restrictive to them. It can actually, there's a lot of dangers. Those walkers can tip over, so we want to caution parents about the safety of what it is that they're purchasing. We also want to caution them about the size of toys so that they're appropriate for the child. We don't want a toddler playing with small little Legos, right? Because they're going to choke on them. So we want to make sure that we're discussing those safety items so that it's at the parents' forefront of their mind when they're shopping for toys for their children. Although people might think that the pushing, rolling toys help to develop muscles, they actually restrict the movements of the child. So again, there's ways to help those areas develop other than utilizing something that restricts the movement of the child. So how do we determine if a child is not reaching their developmental milestones? Well, we have a couple different ways to go about that. One, any parent who has taken their child to the pediatrician has probably filled out a form, and it's specific to the age that the child is when you're going in, and it just asks some basic questions. So when they're babies, it asks, is the child talking? Are they walking? Are they engaging with you and making eye contact? And various simple questions that the parents can answer. And with having that filled out at every pediatrician appointment, then we have a record of the development of this child, and we can identify any discrepancies really early on. The forms are objective and subjective measures. So asking if the child engages with the parent is going to be more of a subjective measure, where is the child walking is objective because they're either walking or they're not, right? And then we're going to want to provide early assessment for those individuals who might have a discrepancy. So it's estimated that about 16% of kids have some sort of disability, but of that 16%, only 30% are identified before kindergarten. And if we can identify these children earlier, then we can provide them more resources and more assistance earlier on, which will help to enhance their development and help there to be less of a discrepancy by the time they go to school and by the time they're in kindergarten. The Ages and Stages is another great resource. It's called the ASQ. And what this is it's a series of 19 questionnaires, and it's specific about the about various developmental skills common in everyday life. And it ranges for kids from 1 month to 5.5 years. This might be the tool that's used at the pediatrician's office, or we might have a different tool that's utilized there. But there's different surveys that are appropriate for kids at different ages, and it is very specific in what it's talking about, and it's a great resource. The Ages and Stages also provides parents with some good ideas about how to enhance development of their children along the way. So ideas about play and various interactions. So it's a great resource for parents to utilize, the ASQ. So we're going to end with a question. A father tells a nurse that his child is filling up the house with collections such as seashells, bottle caps, baseball cards, and pennies. The nurse should recognize the child is developing. I'll give you a second. What do you think it is? It's going to be concrete operational thinking. And this is because they're now, with the concrete operational thinking, they're able to classify, sort, order, and otherwise organize facts about the world. And this ability enables the child's ability to create collections. So this is the child's way of demonstrating that and of utilizing that newly acquired skill. So this would be something to encourage to a point. You can only have so many collections in the home, right? But we want to allow the child to demonstrate that they have achieved these different milestones. If you have any questions, feel free to come see me in office hours or send me an email or a text, and I will see you soon.